Hello everyone. Well, that was Ross Flynn stepping in at practically zero notice to cover Nasya Skudakuruti, who is on jury duty. And Ross did a terrific job there. And thank you very much to Yogesh from PCCW Global Console Connect, Adam Hayes from SI, and Matthias Munfelder from MNIFI did a terrific job talking about everything business model related to IoT. And indeed, within MEF, we have separate subgroups from our working groups looking at the whole area of RCS commercial models and SMS commercial models. So the commercial model side of things is supremely important. And as you'll be hearing, no doubt, later today and indeed tomorrow, links totally into the world of fraud and revenue assurance. But now we're moving on to a very, very different topic. And that is something that does impact us all. It doesn't matter whether you're a large organization, a small organization, an individual like you or I. That is the area of sustainability. And I'd like to introduce you to Gerrit from Konijnenberg. Gerrit, hi.
Hi, James, and thanks for the introduction. I couldn't have done it better myself.
Well, apart from your name, I think it'll probably be MEF CONNECTS Wholesale 2035 by the time I approach saying your name correctly. But great seeing you again. We were together at the business messaging event in Amsterdam in June. And that's where you actually started off with a session in the real world looking at this area. But now you have a different profile of speaker and you're looking at it from a different angle. So what have you got coming up?
Yes, thanks for mentioning Amsterdam. Amsterdam was a great event. We had a very good response on this very special topic. And you could ask yourself, why is this topic now on the agenda? And it's very simple. Towards 2030, we all have to become net zero and we have to reduce. So also in the telecom sector, we have to work hard. And this session, like the one before, is all about why do we have to do things? What can we do and how can we do it? And we have fantastic speakers lined up. So I'll just have a very short introduction and move on to the...
Fantastic. So Gerrit, I'll leave you to it. And thank you very much. And great to see you again here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, James. And also thanks to all the sponsors for this series. So we have today a lineup of 3 different speakers. And all under the title, Sustainability is Making It Priority Viable. That's a very big question, especially in these difficult times of supply chain and energy crisis. And therefore, I'm very happy that today we have Dr. Celia Sapart. She is the Director of Communications and Climate Science at CO2 Value Europe. Also, we have an operator joining, and that will be Dominique Rousseau, who is the Vice Director at Vodafone. And he will tell us a lot about the Vodafone Planet strategy. So that is more about what can we do today and how is Vodafone leading the pack. He will be supported by Francesco Frollo, who is the head of device operations in Hong Kong and products and services Planet lead. So that is the lineup of the speakers. After my brief introduction and recap of the Amsterdam session, Celia will have a fantastic presentation, directly followed by Dominique and Francesco. Thereafter, we will take questions and be interactive with you online. So let's see what we discussed in Amsterdam. And by the way, I have been with MEF for about 20 years in different roles. I'm now a special advisor, but also I am very happy to share that I passed the Director's Climate Journey with Chapter 0, and I'm one of the highest ranked ambassadors of Climeworks, who is all about direct air capturing. And Celia will talk a little bit more about direct air capturing, how we can take CO2 out of the air and reuse it in a different way. So in our session in Amsterdam, just a small recap, just one slide, is that we showed here the assessment of the IPCC report. And on the left side, you see the globe with these little cubicles. And in the center of that circles on the left, you see Western Europe. And these 3 different graphs represent the rise of temperature, the heavy rainfall, or the drought, which we are and can expect over the world. And in the session in Amsterdam, I showed clearly what happened in Western Europe over the last year. But I think it is clear that the report is saying that climate change is already affecting every inhabited region across the globe. And well, if we think about the last 2 months, since the last session in Amsterdam, what happened? We have seen really hot extremes in the UK, 40 plus Celsius. That was extreme. At the moment, half of Pakistan is underwater. 30 million people are having serious problems because of the heavy rain combined with the melting water of the Himalayas. But also there are supply chain problems because the drought in the Yangtze River in China has led to closing of hydropower, which impacted factories like Toyota, but also Foxconn, who is the supplier of, for example, the Apple devices. So it is impacting us in different ways. But what is really impacting, I think, us in the long term is the Arctic global warming. The Arctic warming, both on the Arctic and Antarctic, came out that the temperatures are rising 4 times faster, 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. And that is a study which was published in the Financial Times last August. So a month ago, we came to that conclusion. So that is, I think, from my side, one of the key reasons why we can be very happy that we have as a next speaker here, Celia Sapart, because Celia is one of the rare peoples and unique peoples in the world who has been working on the Arctics whilst measuring climate change. So she has really a lot of insight, personal experience, which she will share with us. And thereafter, she will talk a little bit more about how we should maybe act in the view of CO2 Value Europe. So having said so, I would like to give the word to Celia, and let's go through that session. And I promise you it's very interesting. Celia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gerrit, for the invitation and for the introduction. And good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to participate in this session, which is I think I have a little bit of a different background than others, but I'm very happy to contribute. So indeed, I have experienced the very harsh region. So yeah, this is my last slide. Do you mind to go to the first one? Or should I do it myself quickly? Sorry for the technical issue. So indeed, I have experienced the polar region, the Arctic and the Antarctic. And as Gerrit just said, these regions are the most vulnerable on Earth. So the ice is melting very strongly there. But it's also the regions where we can understand the history of our climate and the history of our humanity. Here you see a picture of the Greenland ice sheet, so the Greenland ice continent with 2.5 kilometers of ice above it. And in this ice, when you study it, when you measure different things, you can know what was the climate in the past, and you can so better understand the climate system to be able to better predict future climate. So the Arctic is not only about what is happening now, but it's also about understanding what is happening in our climate system. And how does it work? Very shortly. So what we do, we go on the top of the Greenland ice sheet. So it looks like this. So you more or less have ice and the sky. And we put some tents. So we sleep on the small tents here on the left. And we have different tents where we eat, the black tents. And we drill some tunnels under the ice where we drill ice core. So with a thick cylinder of ice all the way down to 2.5 kilometers. But we go 3 meters per 3 meters. And in this ice, we have the very precious information. So here you see a sample of ice in my hands. You see ice and so many small points, and these are air bubbles. And in each air bubbles, you have a little bit of our atmosphere of the past. So we can measure the greenhouse gas concentration in the past in these bubbles. But in analyzing the ice, so in melting the ice, we can also know what was the temperature of the past at the moment where the snow was falling on the ice sheet. And we can also, of course, date the ice. and identify different events, for example, volcanic eruptions. For example, when I was in Greenland in 2009, we could observe the eruptions of the Vesuvio all the way to Greenland. So it's to show that whatever happens more or less in the northern hemisphere, it will be recording in Greenland. And I have also observed the beginning of the human activity during the Roman times in this Greenland ice sheet. So it's something that really tells not only about the climate, but about our own history. And I have also worked on other type of ice. Here's some picture of one of my Arctic expedition. I crossed the Arctic Ocean in 2014 on the Oden icebreaker, Swedish icebreaker. And on the left, you see a picture of the sea ice. So it's the ice that is floating at the surface of the Arctic Ocean. You see all these small lakes on top of the sea ice because the ice is melting very fast. We have lost 50% of the surface of the sea ice in the Arctic in 50 years. And you can think, wow, but this is very far away. Why do we really matter about it? But in fact, sea ice is one of the main controller of our climate and on the weather we have at different latitude, all the way down to Europe. So what is happening there is extremely important for our climate today and for our future climate. So first we need to understand it, because we also need to be well prepared to adapt to the changes and also to try to mitigate climate change and to mitigate, of course, the risk related to climate change. I have also worked on the other side in the South Pole, in Antarctica, in the winter, so the harshest conditions on Earth, as you can see in this picture. You can hardly recognize me there. We were drilling also on the sea ice there, but one of the very bad surprise was that until then, so that was in 2017, we had thought that the Antarctic sea ice was quite preserved from climate change in comparison to Arctic sea ice. And we had some pioneers, some people that are going in the field in this region for 40, 50 years. And we were expecting to have 1.5 meter of sea ice on top of the Southern Ocean, and the Ross Sea, in this specific location. And in fact, we only have 10, 20, 30, sometimes 50 centimeters. So you see this picture on top there, we had 50 centimeters of ice. We could just stand on it, so to do some drilling, because we were analyzing the ice and go back on the ship. So realizing that was for us quite devastating as scientists, because realizing that even the big continent, even around Antarctica, I mean, the influence of our activity is enormous, much bigger than we had expected on the sea ice specifically. But we also had to take a lot of risks because the ice conditions was not good enough for us to walk on it most of the time. So we had to go sometimes on small rubber boats. You see the picture on the right here. So we were not supposed to be on the ice, as you see there. We were supposed to be on the water and just sampling some ice there and there. But one night, and that was in the middle of the expedition, the wind started to blow. And then at once, very quickly, we got stuck in the ice and we started drifting away from the icebreaker. And the icebreaker is the only thing that relates us to life, in fact, because on such a rubber boat, you don't have any food, anything to drink. It was minus 55 degrees Celsius. So wind was blowing very, very fast. And we were just drifting away, being 3 weeks away from the closest rescue point. So without knowing what will happen to us. And for me, that was really a specific moment where I was extremely angry, realizing what was happening around us in terms of climate change. But also because it's the first time I really thought I was not going to get back home. And after this time, this angriness really stayed in me. And I was really thinking, what do I do now in the lab, measuring this ice? And what? I'm going to write a few papers and nothing will change. So I have decided to invest really in climate actions. And it's where I joined CO2 Value Europe. And I will explain that a bit afterwards. So when we speak about our climate, what is in fact happening now is that we have human-induced greenhouse gas emissions that are continuing to increase always more, even though we should be decreasing already for a very long time. So you see in this graph the greenhouse gas emissions on the left and on the x-axis the dates. So what you see that we are continuing increasing, but that we should try to, if we want to preserve life on Earth or to prevent a massive degradation of life on Earth, and it's not about saving the planet, it's about preserving our lives on Earth, we should really try to reach maximum 1.5 degrees Celsius of temperatures increase globally. But now if we look at the current policy, we are aiming to 3 degrees Celsius. And a world at 1.5 degree or 3 degrees has nothing to do with each other. 3 degrees Celsius, it means that 1/3 of Africa will be a place where we cannot live anymore. It means massive migrations. We speak about millions, maybe billions of people will need to migrate. And it means also a lot of issue also in Europe in terms of droughts, etc. So we need to do everything to prevent to get in this red line. If we want to get on this blue line, we need to be able to invert the emission trend by 2025. This means that we need to stop the increase in the emissions, we need to stabilize the emission and to start the decrease in a few years' time. Of course, this is an enormous challenge, but solutions exist in that direction. And we need to halve our emissions by 2030 and to reach carbon neutrality or even climate neutrality if we take all greenhouse gases by 2050. The good news is that the last IPCC report showed that we have solutions in all sectors to reach the target for 2030 and also for 2050, and that we have the money to do it, but we need to shift the money now in the transition quite fast. So this is, I think, a very important message. And another one is that inaction will cost much more money than the fact of acting to mitigate our climate. But it's not only about decarbonizing the emissions, it's also about defossilizing the economy, because the emissions are only the symptoms, but the cause of the problem is the fact that we are burning a lot of fossil carbon that should still be in our ground, but that we are extracting and putting it in the atmosphere. So the IPCC is also clear on the fact that no more investment on fossil carbon infrastructure are compatible with reaching climate objectives. So we should really phase out coal by 2030 and oil and gas by 2050. So it means that we have an urgent need for more low carbon energy sources, but also we need alternative carbon feedstock, because everything we have around us, for us inclusive, are made out of carbon. And the alternative carbon feedstock will be the CO2 from our emissions at that point, but also from the air, the biomass, or recycled plastic or carbon from recycled products in general. So we need for the creation of a circular carbon economy. And it's where CO2 Value Europe come in place. So it's the organization where I'm scientific director since 2019. It's a relatively young organization, 5 years old. It's a non-profit organization that is advocating for the creation of a circular carbon economy based on the utilization of CO2, also called carbon capture and utilization. So it's a fact of utilizing CO2 or from flue gases or directly from the air using renewable energy and converting this CO2 into different kind of products. You can convert it into materials, for example, building materials where CO2 will be stored permanently, but you could also convert it into renewable fuels or renewable chemicals. So chemicals based on CO2 and renewable hydrogen, for example, so different type of hydrocarbons. And there in the chemicals and fuels, it won't be stored permanently, but the idea is to really think in terms of circularity and loop to re-inject the CO2, for example, after the e-fuel is burned into the system to not to have any emissions in the atmosphere. So these CCU technologies, they enable to reduce net CO2 emission, but also to avoid it and later on to remove it from the atmosphere. And these three terms, reduce, avoid, and removed, are often mixed up. So I just give a very short definition there. So when we speak about net reductions, it's about less CO2 that is added to the atmosphere. So we really reduce at the sources. When we speak about avoiding emissions, it means that we won't have any emissions anymore. So we suppress, we avoid the emission from a specific services, for example, shifting to the lowest emission mode or just deciding not to do these services anymore. And when we speak about CO2 removal, it's about removing the CO2 from the atmosphere via techniques that are anthropogenic, made by anthropogenic activities, for example, direct air capture, and then store the CO2 or in the soil or in products, but it will be stored on very long time scale. Why is it important to have the right definition there? It's because these three different things do not have the same impact. For example, removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it away will create negative emissions. So that it's a sink of CO2, so really removing the CO2 from the atmosphere, and we will need it. While avoiding and reducing, it's about really decreasing the emissions. And in terms of time scale, today we are busy with a reduction already, and by 2050 we should be able to remove always more CO2 from the atmosphere. So 2 quick examples of CO2 utilization. So one of it is the renewable fuels and chemicals. We also call it power to X, power to fuels sometimes. It's the fact of using renewable electricity to break the water molecules and make renewable hydrogen, and then use this hydrogen together with the CO2 that we capture or in the flue gas or in the air to make hydrocarbons. We can make more or less every hydrocarbons we have now on the market with these technologies. And you might think, why don't we use directly hydrogen, for example, as a fuel? Because we could do it and it will prevent to use also the CO2. It's because today we need drop-in solutions. We need to be able to have low carbon fuels and to use it in the infrastructure that we have today. So we need hydrocarbons for that, because we cannot use hydrogen in the current infrastructure. So in doing this is the advantages. We can use it directly in our infrastructure. For example, we can make CH4 natural gas with this system and directly use it in the pipeline we have now, which will not be the case directly for hydrogen. But the disadvantage is that we lose in energy efficiency. So from the amount, if we have 100% renewable electricity, we'll use about 40% of the energy when we get all the way to the fuel on the right-hand side. So these are the main things. So it will allow us to move away from fossil fuel, but also to facilitate renewable electricity uptake, storage, and transportation, especially to area where we cannot use directly renewable electricity. So this is an important message. Of course, when we can use renewable electricity directly, we should do it, but there are many sectors, especially intensive industry, where we go to very high temperatures that cannot be electrified, at least not now, and where we need, for example, natural gas that we can produce via this equation. And another example is the role of CO2 mineralization. So the idea is to capture CO2 from an industry or later also from the air. And in a carbonation plant, we will make it react with reactive waste. We have gigatons of urban waste, construction waste everywhere in Europe and in the world. And these wastes are very valuable because they have energy and they contain also minerals. We can make them react with the CO2 to create calcium carbonate. So it's a rock, the same rock that we have also in our mountains here. But we can do that while in the nature it happens on hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. Now we have technology to do that in a few minutes. And we can construct aggregates that can be used to substitute cement in the concrete mix, so to decrease the carbon footprint of the material, but also to store CO2 permanently in material. So this is a very interesting product, and it also allows to reduce landfills, which is also a big issue, and to create stronger and more sustainable materials where CO2 is stored permanently. But when we think about solutions, very often we think about low carbon energy, electrification, different type of fuels, the fact of storing CO2 or in the ground or in products or removing it from the atmosphere. But what we need to think about before that, it's efficiency. Efficiency, it means that we should decrease as much as possible the amount of energy and the amount of material we use for a specific product or goods. But we also have to consider that we live on a planet with its limits. Many of the planetary limits have been overshot already, and this is quite dramatic. I think not many people realize what it means, but it will make our life very complicated in the future. So it means that we need also to think in terms of sobriety. What does it mean, sobriety? It means we should think about, do we really need this service or this good? Because, in fact, we need to think about the essential, and the essential is water, food, energy, having a roof above our head, and also the fact of continuing having social contact. And if we do not think strategically about sobriety now, the nature will impose us a sobriety that will be very abrupt and where we might lose the essential. So now it's very important to think about it and to think about where we should put the focus on, and it will be on the essential. And there is also the circularity. I spoke here about carbon circularity, but there are many other types of circularity. It means using waste to create new products, to reduce the demand on raw materials. And there are many examples of this. And the next speaker, Dominique Rousseau, will give an example of what they do in Vodafone with a huge amount of e-waste they have and how we can work in this context about circularity. Thank you. So the word to Dominique.
Yes, thank you, Celia. I think this is really enlightening that you say that there will be a cost of doing nothing. And that is something we have to keep in mind when we are or need to invest. So let's go indeed now to Dominique. I have the slides here for you, Dominique. I've introduced you. So to use the time efficiently, we directly go to your slides. You're muted, Dominique. No, we can't hear you. That is a pity. Okay, I'm not muted, so it must be somewhere in your system, Dominique. That is a pity, because your session on Vodafone Plan and Strategy is really interesting. And I was really intrigued to see at Mobile World Congress already that Vodafone had a very nice green stand. And I think that that was for the first time that at Mobile World Congress, different mobile operators were showing, I would say, the unique challenge we all have. At that stage, Orange won a prize by the GSMA for their program called Oscar. And that Oscar is also dealing with sustainability. And I think the other operators there present, like we hear today with different operators, like Zain, also showed their efforts in delivering the sustainability programs. Dominique, can you try again, see if it works? No, I'm afraid we cannot hear you yet. Would it be possible maybe to try the microphone of your colleague Francesco? Maybe that is an idea. Also, James is muted.
Sorry, I am. I came back in whilst Dominique sorts things out his end. And Dominique, once you've got things sorted, please try again and come back in. I'll just chat to you a little bit, Gerrit, about what we've just been hearing. So it links into what we were talking about in the business message.
Yeah, James, I think that's a good question. I think when we look at back at the previous session on IoT, IoT is really one of the key enablers to measure in the near future CO2 emissions. And that is needed. Why? Because a lot of the large companies are obliged by the new ESG reporting guidelines to really measure these emissions and to report on them. Yeah, so I think IoT and IoT devices will be massively deployed over the next decade to help this automated, digitalized measuring. So, and that is a lot of companies who could work on that. And there are also other aspects of it. If we look at the negative impact of, for example, the heavy rains and the floodings, SMS warnings are key to that. So I think there's also the messaging side of things, not only measuring, but also the messaging. So Dominique, maybe we are back with you?
Unfortunately not.
Unfortunately, we are still not. Then we...
So what we can do, we can bring Celia back in and we can talk.
Yes, I think that is great.
Celia, can you answer my question? Because again, we've got large corporations around the world. People keep talking about them, bringing about them. What is in it for the SMEs that actually really carry the world economy? And let's be frank, if you look at Africa and the developing world, it's all small companies, apart from a few big brands. How do you get that message across, and what's in it for them for embracing this? You're on mute. You're doing my trick.
Sorry, just mute when you do that. I think we need to realize it's not only about larger corporate or SMEs, because we have many of them both of them in our members. So we really see also what they are facing and how they can try to find solutions, and the challenges are different. But what we see is that we need very good communications between the different corporates and with the SMEs to realize that, in fact, problems of one industry sometimes could be a solution for SME and vice versa. So I'm not sure I answer exactly your question, but I speak about my experience at CO2 Value Europe. And what we see is that sometimes in SMEs, it's more easy to make also the business model change and also the mentality of the employees, and it's faster to get the thing changed than in big.
What I'm getting at really, it's a cost saving, because if we look at network technology, we've talked a lot about 5G already in this wholesale event, and we have sessions on 5G roaming, and indeed the last session of the whole event, sponsored by Deutsche Telekom Global Carrier, is looking at 5G roaming security. And that with this new infrastructure and technology like 5G, they actually use less power, and they are more, let's say, environmentally friendly. So technology has got a huge role to play as well.
Yes. So we have Dominique back.
Can you hear us?
Yes,
Perfect.
we can, Dominique. I will go. So thank you, Celia,
thanks, James.
for jumping back in.
Thanks, James.
Perfect. Thank you, Dominique, and sorry for the stress. So can we move to?
Yeah, absolutely. So just try to.
For you. Here we are. The floor is yours, Dominique.
Yeah. Thanks, Gerrit, and thanks, Celia. I think we try to move away from the cold areas of the world into what can we do in effect to help our customers to address this big challenge that Celia explained. How do we reduce CO2 footprint? And reading that, looking at that picture probably is something that you recognize yourself. And hopefully this is not the picture that is exactly fitting to what you see at home, but it's clearly an issue that we all have. We all have devices sleeping at home, and we don't really know what to do with that. This is a perfect example that how we can address the CO2 footprint, how we can reduce e-waste, and we'll try to elaborate on that. In the world, we have 6.7 billion active smartphones today, and more than 2 billion of these smartphones are staying into drawers. And according to United Nations Global E-Waste, production is on track to reach 120 billion tons by year 2050 if the trend continues, and less than 20% of this e-waste is formally recycled. On the other side of the coin is that all of this standing still material and equipment are worth billions and hundreds of billions of US dollars and euros. So this is clearly an opportunity for us to support customers in addressing e-waste, and by that, reduce significantly our CO2 footprint. Next slide, please. So talking about reducing CO2 footprint, let me clarify shortly what we mean. CO2 emissions are classified in three categories, three scope if you want. The CO2 we generate with our own operations, so in our case, running the network, but also running the retail stores, lighting them, etc. So these are the scope 1 and scope 2 CO2 emissions. And there is also the CO2 emissions that are generated indirectly by our business, in particular because of the product that we sell. These products are not made by Vodafone, so we are just buying and reselling. So these are the product classified in scope 3. And I mean on that because this is extremely important that we look at that end to end. So we are not obviously focusing only on 1 and 2, we are really focusing on scope 3. And when you think about it, the handsets that we sell as an operator are ranked amongst the top 3 contributor in CO2 emissions in the world. So this is very clear already that acting as a standalone entity, as a alone, is not an option. We really need to partner, really need to act together. And interestingly, what you see on the market is that our customers are really getting concerned. 70% customers are looking into environmental impact when they are deciding to buy a new phone. This translates already in macro trends. The global handset sales in 2021 have reached a peak of 1.7 billion units worldwide, and we see this now starting to decline as of this year. As opposed to that, refurbished device sales is set to grow from 200 million units in 2021 up to 260 million units in 2025. So at Vodafone, we want to take the lead on that. This creates a massive impact to reduce CO2 footprint. Next slide, please. So you may have seen these big ambitions that have been communicated by our group CEO, Nick Reed. So we want to become net zero by 2040. We want to act more strongly into circularity by reusing our networks equipment, our device as well. And we want to create an enabling a positive impact into the planet with the product that we are developing. Next slide, please. I would like to just explain you a little bit in detail, given the short time we have, what we are doing in device to really make it as a reality for our consumer. Our strategy is composed of 3 big initiatives in device. How do we reduce e-waste, and how do we, by that, reduce our CO2 footprint? Number 1, we want to provide the ability to our consumer to extend life cycle of product. By definition, the longer the product can live, the lower the CO2 footprint of that device is. And with that, we are investing massively into a global trade-in platform that provides consumer the ability to sell to us, or resell to us their old device, and we can propose instead recycled device to new set of customers. This service has been launched already in 3 markets, Germany, Ireland, and UK, and we are currently expanding these global trade-in solutions in more markets. The second big area of our strategy is to remove plastics from our operations and our products. So clearly, we have already taken actions to remove plastic bags in the retail store. We are collecting devices as well in each retail stores. And more importantly, we are also acting on the product very strongly. And we have introduced recently the half-size SIM that we kicked off in October last year. And we are by that providing an eco SIM, which is half size the original format, which is made out of recycled plastics. Only with this small initiative, we are saving 320 tons of plastic every year, which is an equivalent, if I have to make that comparison, of 3 blue whales every year, plastic saved, simply because of the fact we are using a different set of SIM card. And the last initiative I want to talk about quickly is about we want to make our product more eco-friendly. So we have introduced eco rating at our point of sales, and we are providing the ability to consumer to understand how eco-friendly the product they are expecting to buy is. So this is a standard that we have defined with 5 operators in Europe, and that to me is one of the best examples that creating impact is a matter of acting together, join forces. And that leads me to the first, I would say, takeaway. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be very short in my speech, but the first takeaway for me is clearly about how can we join more actions together across telcos, but also with our partners to really create the impact. We have some solutions, but we'll be more powerful if we act together. The second big takeaway is that e-waste is clearly a cost burden in our business, but we believe there is a huge opportunity from that we can support customers in addressing this pile of e-waste that they have at home. And this is clearly an opportunity we want to grasp. And the third area is about providing customer the choice, giving more transparency about the product that they buy, and giving them the ability to understand that when they decide to buy a product by us, they understand that this product, how eco-friendly the product is. And that's something we really want to invest more. And obviously, we need the support as well on our partners, on our suppliers, to be effective in doing that. With that, I will pause and hand over back to Gerrit for the questions, if there is any.
Yes, thank you very much, Dominique. And I think it's enlightening to see that Vodafone Red becomes Vodafone Green, I think. How do you define success? You must have some metrics for yourself. You mentioned 70% of the customers is very aware, eco-aware, but what are we talking millions of devices? What is in your mind? What is your success?
Well, as you know, as you have introduced, I'm sitting here with Francesco, who is driving the sustainability and the circularity program at Vodafone across the piece in my team. We are clearly focusing in providing transparency in all retail stores. We have engaged with 15 suppliers that are really supporting this activity, and each of them are eco-rating their own devices. So they have a keen interest to provide the best eco rate at our point of sale. So, and by definition, this makes the story self-fulfilling. And we have ranked, if I'm not mistaken, Francisco, more than 170 handsets already. And this journey is going on as we speak.
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
maybe if I may just add, we see trends from the American markets where the trade-in volumes, which are attached to buying new devices, the trade-in percentages is very high, it's 40%, 50%. In Europe in general, all operators are still in the early stages because basically the attach rates are still low for all of us operators. And what we're planning to do is to increase this as much as we can so that we can, in the future, get to this high level of trade-in attach rate.
Yes. Francesco, since you lost 5 minutes in the beginning, is there anything you want to address which was maybe squeezed out in the hurry by Dominique?
No, I think we are really working on device circularity. It's really an important strategic topic for Vodafone, but also for the other operators. One really important thing is that we are not alone in this journey. We also need to work with the supply manufacturers, which are really the ones actually which are producing the devices, because they are at the beginning of the production and they are actually the main contributors for CO2 to start with. So we are liaising with them, obviously, to make sure that the circular economy, from the beginning, from production until use of material, reuse of material, becomes as circular as possible. So it's challenging, but we are, going on the right trajectory.
Yes. Yeah. Whilst you were working on the microphone, Celia mentioned that it's so important that the whole ecosystem is contributing to the green shift. Now, you mentioned, let's say, the scope 1 and 2, measuring your own and reducing your own consumption of energy. When will the point be that you will start demanding from other players who might be in this session? We have about 400 people joining here from different companies globally. When will you start demanding from your suppliers that they also have their own program in place and that they will start reporting to you in a proper way?
So this is already the case. We already do it, Gerrit. And in each business award decision today, we are factoring in with a certain level of percentage, I would say, this dimension on how sustainable solution the supplier is providing to us. So we are really already embedding that dimension into our business award decisions. So this is happening now.
Wonderful. Okay, good to hear. Celia, maybe the last word to you, because we had an extra 5 minutes, but we have to close it off now. So thanks for joining. Is there anything else you would like to join or mention to us?
I'm sorry if my talk took a bit too long, by the way, but I'm very happy to see the effort of Vodafone, and I think we really need to go in this direction and to work together. So I think it's the most important thing, to work together towards the climate targets. That's what we have to do.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Celia, for those closing remarks. We'll now head back to James, and thanks for having us, James, in this session today. And we'll be back again in November at the next MEF Connect event. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.